us live from Mansion House in central London is the entrepreneur and Dragon Den and Sky News Money Panel member, James Caan. First of all, apologies for keeping you waiting in the cold, Mr. Caan. What interest rate decision are you expecting today, and what would you like to see?
I think I'm expecting the interest rates to come down by between 50 to 100 basis points. I think my wish would be to see the MPC to bring those rates down more to 1%. I think right now we need to focus on getting the economy back on track. We probably saw last night that New Zealand dropped its rates by 150 basis points, which kind of illustrates the extent of this issue. So I think there are two issues for us here. One is to make sure that we get the rates down to a more sensible level, but more importantly, what the government needs to do is to ensure that the banks pass those rates reductions onto the consumer and, more importantly, onto business, because right now I'm not sure that the business actually is benefiting from some of the rates that have come down.
Absolutely, that has always been the complaint, hasn't it? We know about this London interbank lending rate, the rate at which banks lend to each other. There's pressure from that, certainly, but how much are businesses being affected by the cost of credit at the moment? And if there is an interest rate cut, do you think they will see the benefits? Are you confident that the banks will pass it on?
I mean, I think certainly as an entrepreneur and somebody who's very interactive with the business community and also with the banking community, one of the things that I'm finding is the banks are very reluctant to pass some of those reductions onto business, and I think that's really the thing that's creating a bit of an artificial situation, because on the one hand we're saying rates are coming down, but if those rates are not penetrating to lenders, if there's liquidity still not back in the market, then actually what are we really achieving here? And I think whilst I applaud the government for bringing in a lot of very interesting initiatives about protecting mortgages and VAT cuts, etc., but actually for me what I'd like to see is a stronger stimulation package for the business community, because if the business community is thriving and succeeding, they will keep people in jobs. But if the business community is not really benefiting from some of these changes the government are actually implementing, then actually people will lose jobs. And at the moment, I think the biggest fear for everybody is to protect jobs in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. How tough is it out there at the moment, and how has the credit crunch and this global downturn affected you and your businesses?
I mean, to be honest with you, right now we are absolutely experiencing very, very challenging times, because essentially, we have a liquidity issue, we have a confidence issue. A lot of people are not spending money, businesses are not investing money. People are extremely concerned about the outlook for next year, and on the back of that, everybody's tightening their belts. And fundamentally, I think what I'm experiencing is across the board in all my businesses, revenues are coming down substantially, and when revenues come down, profits go down, and all of a sudden we then have to cut back. And that's really where I think not just me, but across the country right now, I think businesses are finding it incredibly difficult, and their biggest concern is that the outlook for next year, unfortunately, is looking even worse.
Yeah, absolutely, and revenues come down, and that's when people lose their jobs. You say the outlook for next year looks worse. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? If we get this interest rate cut, it'll be down to 2%. I mean, none of us remember that in our lifetimes, really, do we? Not since, I think, 1951 has it been that low. Will that make a difference, and when do you think there will be an end to this downturn?
I mean, I would hope that by the end of next year, we should see liquidity back in the market. We should see interbank lending come to a more sensible level. And I think once some of these reductions filter through into business, into the market and into lenders, I think business will start to see some confidence coming back. The problem is we are now in such a global economy that Britain is not isolated anymore along, in its own area, because so many of our businesses trade internationally. So where we are relying on export, or we're relying on, doing business abroad, and those economies are struggling as much as ours are, I think this is going to take a lot longer before we start to see some positive news out there. And I think the government's prediction that the third to fourth quarter of next year, they're expecting to see a kickback, is actually something I fundamentally do not see. I don't understand where they're getting those numbers from. That to me, that prediction is nothing more than I see in Dragon's Den, where people make up numbers and just live on hope. I think this is going to be a lot longer than just a short blip in the economy.
Yeah, You're not alone in saying that, I have to say, which is something no doubt we will challenge the government on in the future. Can I just ask you about Woolworths? As you're a Dragon's Den entrepreneur, and so is Theo Pafitis, he's decided to pull out of any purchase of Woolworths today. Is it likely to be one of those struggling chains that just goes by the wayside, do you think?
I mean, to be honest, I did actually look at Woolworths myself, and I think my fundamental view was, I think the problem with Woolworths today, as a brand in the high street, the question is, what exactly does Woolworths stand for? Because the problem I think we have with Woolworths is every product that Woolworths sells, there's now a specialist on the high street that does that. So if you imagine when Woolworths set up 99 years ago, there was a place in the high street for a generalist. But if you look at each of the areas that Woolworths specialises in, and let's say clothing, for example, you've got Primark in every high street today that sells the same product but cheaper. So the problem I think that Woolworths has is what actually is its positioning in the high street. I think it's lost its crown, and therefore even if a bailout was to take place, I think it needs a lot of kind of radical restructuring. So I think, whether it's Theo or somebody else in the market looking at that will be a very challenging turnaround. I mean, I wish every success for Woolworths and the employees of Woolworths, but I think economically we have to be very conscious that we're saving businesses that genuinely have a strategy for long-term survival.
Doesn't sound great, does it? James Caan, really appreciate your time, and thank you for bearing with us in the cold. Dragon's Den and Sky News Money panel member James Caan, live there in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Well, we talked about the cold.
Could actually do right now. How about talking to one of our Sky News Money panel, the entrepreneur James Caan, of course, Dragon's Den too. Was there any other thing that the bank could actually?
Not really, Michael. I think it was fairly predictable that we should really hold. I think from a government point of view, they really didn't have much choice. If you look at the sensitivity of energy prices right now and food prices and just the state of the housing market, I think if you had cut interest rates right now, the threat of inflation, I think, was quite severe. I think by putting up interest rates, I think the business community would have been in an uproar. So actually, I think this is a prudent position for the government to take.
Just supposing they had cut by 0.25% as far as industry is concerned, would that have helped?
I think it would have helped, but I think we would have assumed that was an irresponsible decision to make. So I mean, on the one hand, I would have been pleased for business, but I think from a general economy point of view, we're looking for the government to lead, from a leadership point of view, and being irresponsible right now would not be the right thing to do.
So perhaps the government could help an energy crisis, for example?
Well, I think from the energy point of view, I think the key issue the government has, which I think it's for the government to give, is there is 70% of the fuel price we pay today is actually tax. And I think because it's causing so many problems on inflation and domestic home users, I think the government should cut the levy on tax from fuel prices, which I think would help the people generally, but also would reduce inflation if they could do that.
Let me run a theory by you that maybe this 5% held for the next few months might just be enough to calm inflation down, and then there may be a window of opportunity for an interest rate cut later this year. Is that how you see it?
I think it would be prudent, but I think they need to do something with fuel prices, because that is one of the biggest components of inflation right now. So I think it would be smart for them to reduce the level of tax, and then maybe come October, November to review the position. And I think if we get a little bit of a bounce in the autumn, to cut to maybe 4.75, and if they're really ambitious, down to 4.5, I think would be a very smart move for all people concerned.
In your work, you see all sorts of businesses. What's the mood like in UK PLC at the moment?
Right now, Michael, I think the mood is very nervous. I think the general business community right now is genuinely very concerned because of house prices. And I think from a business point of view, there is literally no liquidity in the market at the moment. I think most businesses today, when they're going to banks, they're almost out to lunch. So I think as an economy right now, I think the banking crisis is actually caused a huge problem, but I actually think it's going to get worse coming on to the autumn of this year because there's no liquidity.
James Caan, thanks very much
Thank you
for joining us. So therefore, no movement as far as this one.